What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. I'm going to continue to examine 100 years of the greatest 150 black fighters of all times. Now, Curtis Anderson and myself took a look at Kid Gavilan. His name was Gerardo Gonzalez, and he was known as the Cuban Hawk. Now, when you look at the record of Kid Gavilan, it's astonishing. He stood 5 foot 10 inches, weighed 122 to 156 pounds. He was born January 6, 1926, in Cuba. He was managed by Fernando Balido, Angel Lopez. Had his first professional fight June 5, 1943. And he would defeat Antonio Diaz in Havana, Cuba. Now, Kid Gavilan would be in the ring with fighters such as Patty Young. He would face Ray Robinson twice, Joe Maselli, Fritzy Pruden, Ralph Tiger Jones, Billy Graham, Bo Jack, Ernie Durando, Eduardo Lassie, Ralph Zanelli, Chuck Davey. By the way, Chuck Davey was a southpaw out of Michigan State. And he was a very good fighter. A very good fighter. So that was a good win for Kid Gavilan. Gavilan was in the ring with Gil Turner. Let me tell you about that fight. Fight took place in 1952 in Philadelphia. That was a hell of a fight. One of the best fights that year, but one of the best fights that you would ever see. Because Gil Turner was a crowd pleaser. But guess what? So was Kid Gavilan. And Kid Gavilan would face Ray Robinson in Philadelphia. He felt he got jobbed. He would lose that fight. So anytime he went back to Philadelphia, he wanted to prove a point. And that he did that evening. That was an unbelievable fight with Gil Turner. July 7th, 1952. He would stop Gil Turner in the 11th round. And it was in defense of his welterweight championship strap. Now let's get to the welterweight championship strap. He would win that strap from Johnny Bratton, because he himself would fight Ray Robinson for Ray Robinson's title. And he would come up short. And he fought Ray Robinson July 11th, 1949. The first time he fought him was September 23rd, 1948. Fought him in New York's Yankee Stadium. He would lose to him in 10 rounds. But the second time he fought him in Philadelphia, 15 rounds for the title. And he would come up short. Quite bitter about that. He felt he won. So whenever he had the opportunity to go back to Philadelphia, he made it count. But he'd be in the ring with Ike Williams twice. January 28th, 1949, April 1st, 1949. And they were both in New York. One of their fights were in Yankee Stadium. And the thing with Kid Gavilan, he was known for having the bolo punch. He would chop sugar canes with a machete in Harlem. And he found that the best way to chop the sugar canes would go underarm, underhand, like you're winding up. And he would bring that skill of chopping sugar canes to the ring. But he added something else to that arsenal. Not only will he underhand the bolo punch, but he would also overhand it in combination. Only man I know that I could do that I've seen do that in the ring. But Kid Gavilan would also be in the ring with Bo Jack. He fought him October 14th, 1949 in Chicago Stadium. And he would defeat Bo Jack. He would lose to Lester Felton October 21st, 1949. That was just a couple of days after the Bo Jack fight. And he would lose to him in Detroit. But he would face Laurence Dotil and Bobby Lee. He would lose to Billy Graham, but he would defeat Otis Graham and Robert Villamain. Now, Robert Villamain would face Ray Robinson for the vacant Pennsylvania State Middleweight Championship belt. and Ray Robinson would defeat Robert Villemain. But so would Kid Gavilan. Gavilan would take on Eugene Hairston in Scranton, Pennsylvania. He would lose to him in 10 rounds, October 30th of 1950. Now, Eugene Hairston, as I stated once before, couldn't hear and couldn't speak, and they would develop the blinking lights in New York's Madison Square Garden on behalf of Eugene Hairston. Hit a man after the bell. He was going to be disqualified. And they took it to the commissioner's office. They realized they had to do something about that because you also had a referee who couldn't hear and he couldn't speak. My dad knew Eugene Hairston. He lived in New York. And his mother had to take him out of school because he was being teased all the time. For that reason, he would be sent to the gym. And he would learn pretty quickly. He would learn well enough to defeat Kid Gavilan. Gavilan would also take on a fighter by the name of Tony Gennaro. Fought him December 4th, 1950. Fought him in Cleveland. He would defeat him in 10 rounds. Then December 22nd, he would take on Joe Miceli in New York, defeat him in 10 rounds. That would also take place in 1950. 1951, he would take on Patty Young and defeat him in New York. Now, Patty Young would be the fighter that Carl Bobo Olsen would have to get past in order to win the America's Middleweight Championship belt. 1953. And that would give Carl Bobo Olsen the opportunity to take on Randy Turpin, who was the European middleweight champion. Them two would collide for the vacant middleweight championship strap. Ray Robinson would vacate his strap in 1952 after losing the light heavyweight championship opportunity against Joey Maxim. Couldn't answer the bell for the 14th round because of the heat. It was over 110 degrees in that stadium, Yankee Stadium. And so Patty Young would be the opponent for Carl Bobo Olsen. And when Carl Bobo Olsen defeated Patty Young, he then became the America's middleweight champion, not the world middleweight champion. That would happen when the European champion, Randy Turpin, and him mixed it up. And it was somewhat unified and became the world champion. So that's who Patty Young was. My dad knew Patty Young as well. You used to see him in the gym. You used to see all them guys in Stillman's gym. So Kid Gavilan would take on another fighter by the name of Bobby Dykes. Fought him in Miami. It was for the America's welterweight title, February 4th, 1952. He defeated him in 15 rounds. A lot of people don't know that Kid Gavilan was the America's welterweight champion. And he would eventually get that opportunity to become the world champion. That belt would get him that shot with Johnny Bratton. So Kid Gavilan would continue to fighting Johnny Bratton. And he would face him 1953, November 13th. November 13th, 1953. He would fight Johnny Bratton in Chicago. And he would win the welterweight championship strap. And he would also take on Carmen Basilio and Johnny Cunningham. He would face Carl Bobo Olsen for the middleweight championship strap. He would lose in 15 rounds. And he would remain the welterweight champion. So, Kid Gavilan was the truth. He was a hell of a fighter. And Kurt Anderson and myself elected to place Kid Gavilan on a list of 100 years, the greatest 150 black fighters of all times. He would defeat Chico Vijar and many, many others. So you have to give him his just due. That's what consistency is. That's when you challenge all that is in your way, in your time, in your era, while you're in the ring. And that's what we look for moving forward. Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff Series with Curtis Anderson. We will continue listing great fighters, 150 of them in 100 years of boxing. Bob Montgomery, Philadelphia Bobcat. He was something else. I met Bob Montgomery as he was hanging around the Philadelphia gyms. And in 1971, Bob Montgomery would be the fight promoter for the Blue Horizon. He would open up that arena. Had some great cards there. But Bob Montgomery was born February 10th, 1919, Sumter, South Carolina. He was a lightweight who stood 5 foot 8 inches. And 1919 would be the year that Kid Blackie, Jack Dempsey, who was known as the Manasseh Molar, he would defeat Jess Willard, Toledo, Ohio, and he would capture the heavyweight championship crown. 1919. But Bob Montgomery had 24 amateur fights, won 22 of them, lost 2. He'd be in a ring with fighters such as Lou Jenkins, Sammy Angot, Fritzy Zivic, Petey Scalzo, Bojack, Ike Williams, Luther Slugger White, Al Bummy Davis. Many more, so I can think at the top of my head right now. But I remember a lot of the fights that he had. He stood 5 foot 8 inches, weighed 133 to 143.5 pounds. And the thing with Bob Montgomery, he was in there with a lot of fighters during his day. He won a majority of his fights. But with Bojack, they would make $1 each when they did a charity event during the war. New York's Madison Square Garden. And May 21st, 1943, 15 rounds, he would win a New York Commission Lightweight Championship belt. And the thing with Bob Montgomery, take on Bojack, November 19th, 1943, and he would lose to him. He would lose his New York Commission Lightweight Championship title. Then he would face him March 3rd, 1944, and he would defeat him, win back the title. Now, here's the issue. Now, he would take on Cecil Hudson, Nick Moran, fighters such as that. Leo Radic. He would defeat all of them guys. He would knock out Ali Schultz. Now, Ali Schultz was a very good fighter from New Jersey. I met him. And he would defeat him. He was well respected in a lot of the meetings that I used to attend in New Jersey. But he would have to take on Ike Williams, August 4th, 1947. Fought him in Philadelphia. And he was stopped by Ike Williams for the lightweight title. Now, the thing about it, Ike Williams had stopped Bob Montgomery. But the Philadelphia Commission did not recognize Ike Williams as the champion. They recognized Bob Montgomery because Bob Montgomery was from Philadelphia. And this would infuriate Ike Williams. Now, Ike Williams would win the NBA version of the lightweight championship strap from Juanzarita, Mexico City. He would knock him out in 2 rounds. That fight took place in 1945. But he wasn't considered the world champion because Bob Montgomery would have the New York sack himself. So Ike Williams wanted nothing better than to win that strap. But after he would defeat Bob Montgomery, become universally recognized as the world lightweight champion, he still had a point to prove. And that's when you're a dangerous fighter. As Joe Louis had a point to prove with Max Schmeling in 1938, New York Yankee Stadium, June 22nd to be exact. And Ike Williams came out with a vengeance. because they placed him with Bojack. Now, Bojack was respected in Philadelphia. Ike Williams was not. He was from New Jersey, and New Jersey and Philadelphia were rival states. So Ike Williams would get it on with Bojack in 1948. My God, what a fight that was. And he would stop Bojack in 6 rounds. But Bob Montgomery fought them all. He fought them all. And for that reason, Curtis Anderson and myself placed Bob Montgomery 100 years of the greatest 150 black fighters of all times. I mean, he was in the ring with Pete Scalzo and Cecil Hudson. He would knock out Ike Williams in 12 rounds in 1944, January 25th to be exact. Hell of a fighter was Bob Montgomery. My dad used to talk about him all the time. He knew who Bob Montgomery was. I don't know if he actually met Bob Montgomery. I'm pretty sure he has run across him in the same gyms, in the same circles, you know. But he always talked about the Bobcat, Philadelphia Bobcat, Bob Montgomery. Shout out to Bob Montgomery. He's been added to the list, and with great reason. Just wanted to show you Ike Williams. He was a rugged fighter. I met Ike Williams, talked to him a lot, spoke to him several times. He would be in various meetings in Hall of Fame and so on and so forth. And he would talk to me about life. He would talk to me about the times in which he came, what men were like at that time, what was to be expected of another man, how you don't let another man disrespect you. Tell me about all those things. And he told me about the saga he had with Enrique Bolaños, California. Enrique Bolaños was a very good Mexican fighter. Had the highest regards of respect for Enrique Bolaños. He fought 3 times, and there were issues there. Shout out to Ike Williams. And Bob Montgomery will make the cut. 100 years, the greatest 150 black fighters of all time. 150 greatest black fighters of all time. Now I want to take a look at Jackie Wilson. You had 2 Jackie Wilsons. Now this Jackie Wilson we're looking at was a very, very good fighter. But I don't have a picture of the other Jackie Wilson at the moment. Have it in a scrapbook someplace. But I do want to identify with another Jackie Wilson from Cleveland, California. They would call him California Jackie Wilson. And California Jackie Wilson will be placed on 100 years of the greatest 150 black fighters of all time. He was very consistent. Fought from January 1937 as far as 1948. He was in there with Earl Turner and many good fighters. But he was in the ring with Ray Robinson, 1943. And what was interesting about that, Ray Robinson would lose to Jake LaMotta. And 3 weeks later, he would get a rematch with Jake LaMotta and revenge the loss. In between those 2 fights with LaMotta, 1943, within a 3-week span, he would take on California Jackie Wilson, who was an outstanding fighter. Very, very good fighter. And so I wanted to take the time to add Jackie Wilson from California on the list. Now, the Jackie Wilson you're looking at now, he was a good fighter as well. And I want to make sure he gets the shine that he deserves. Because they had about 3 Jackie Wilsons. And I want to make sure they all get their proper just due. Now, this Jackie Wilson lost 2 of his fights in the first 3 years of his fighting professional career. But the names were not quite enough to take a look at him to place him on the list of 100 years. Greatest 150 black fighters of all times. Although he did very good with the opponents he was up against. And that's consistent. That's what needs to happen. He would average about 7 or 8 fights a year. That's consistency. But I can't place the Jackie Wilson that you're looking at on 100 years. California Jackie Wilson, yes. Curtis and I will place him 100 years. The greatest 150 black fighters of all time. So, just wanted to take the time to do that. Shout out to Jackie Wilson.
Slightly hung over you. Slightly hung over. Slightly hung over you. You shouldn't lie, baby, no, no, to someone who loves you, and I do. Morning after you.
Now, lose to Slugger White. Born February 18th, 1918. He's from Aiken, Georgia. Weighed 137 pounds. He stood 5 foot 6.5 inches. And do you know his very first fight, March 19th, 1937, he'd be in here with Holman Williams. New Orleans. He'd be stopped in 4 rounds. But that would be all right because he would get his career together. Would have 1 fight that year. After that knockout loss to Holman Williams, March 1937, he decided to take the rest of that year off. January 10th, 1938, he would begin again. He would take on Georgie Martin, Holyoke, Connecticut. And he would defeat him in 10 rounds. Then he would fight Vincent Red, February 17th, in Newark, New Jersey. It would be a 2-round no contest. But then he would take on Pancho Villa, June 2nd, 1938. Now that's not the Pancho Villa of the Philippines, who was a flyweight champion. Not thinking today. But this was another Pancho Villa. But he would also be in there with Sammy Julian. Fought him in New York, August 17th, 1938. And he would defeat him in 4 rounds. 1939, he would have about 6 fights. He would win them all. Mickey Holland, Austin McKay, Georgie Martin, and a few others. 1939, he would have about 6 fights. He would win them all. Mickey Holland, Austin McRae, Freddie Cosmuso, and Georgie Martin. But 1940 would be the year that the great fighters would come into play, such as Eddie Charles and Ray Robinson, Willie Pep, Jimmy Bivens, Ike Williams, Cleo Shane, many others. And he would begin his career now. I mean, he would have almost 18 fights that year. He would win them all. He would even fight Ralph Zanelli and defeat him in Falls River. Defeated him in 10 rounds. That was a very good win for loser Slugger White. 1941 would be a very good year. He would have 20 fights that year. He would lose 4 fights that year. He would lose to Leo Ruddock, Bob Montgomery, Mike Evans, all good fighters, and Louis Coco Kid. But he would defeat Mike Evans 2 other times, Bernie Miller, Leonard Bennett, all good fighters, Jimmy Leto twice. So that was still a good year for Luther Slugger White. 1942, he would take on Buster Carroll by knocking him out in 6 rounds. Good win. Billy Davis, Leo Reddick twice, Glenn Johnson, and Willie Joyce. Now he would lose to Willie Joyce, but Willie Joyce would defeat Ike Williams 3 times. Willie Joyce. Don't let nobody kid you. I'll tell you about him. He was one of the most underrated fighters of all time. He's in the list as well. Willie Joyce. And he would fight Henry Armstrong and Bo Jack. He'd fight them all. 1943. He would defeat Willie Joyce January 4th, 1943. Fought him in Baltimore, Maryland. Defeated him in 15 rounds. And he would wind up fighting Sammy Ingot, October 27th of that year. Fought him in Hollywood. Lost to him in 15 rounds. It was for the NBA World Lightweight Championship strap. Now, the thing about Luther Slugger White, he would also defeat Juan Zarita. Juan Zarita was a Mexican fighter who would hold the strap and lose to it in Mexico City in 2 rounds against Ike Williams. But Juan Zarita was very underrated. And when I do Mexican fighters, Kid Azteca, all of them guys would be on that list. So, Luther Slugger White has been added to the list of 100 years of the greatest 150 black fighters of all time. Now, we have about 70 on the list at this point. And we have ways to go because it's 150 total. So like I said, we only have about 4. We might be stretching it a bit with 5 of modern day black fighters because they're not consistent enough. So we'll see what happens. But we got a lot of 70s, a lot of 80s, a lot of 90s. James Toney's and Joe McLennan. We got Mike McCallum's and Colonel Whitaker's. I mean, we have a lot of good fighters. Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson. They're all going to be on that list, obviously. Michael Moore would be on the list. But in the 80s, we got, of course, the Ray Leonards, the Tommy Hearns, we got the Hawkers on the list as well. So, a lot to look forward to. So, Scrapbook Boxing, Curtis Anderson, all great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. We're taking a look at 100 years of the greatest 150 black fighters of all time. Tough task. But it's important that we recognize fighters. Now, I'm going to be putting a lot of other names up and a lot of other pictures up of fighters who may not make the cut. But I want to get their face exposed and a little bit about their profiles exposed as well. So thanks for hanging in there with me. Until next time.